30,000 feet above Kansas, Claire Donovan, a poised flight attendant, sobs uncontrollably before Lena Carter, a sharp black woman in a sleek suit, as stunned passengers stare. 3 minutes ago, Claire humiliated Lena in front of everyone, but now she's begging. Her power shattered in a twist no one predicted. What began as a routine flight from Los Angeles to New York has exploded into a raw showdown, with Lena's future teetering and Claire's dark secret unraveling fast. How did it flip so hard? Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. If you stand for justice kicking prejudice to the curb, hit like, subscribe, and stick around for more epic battles exposing the truth. Lena Carter strode through the sprawling chaos of Los Angeles International Airport, her polished black heels striking the gleaming tile floor with a rhythm that echoed her determination. Sweat beaded on her forehead from the late March heat, but her mind buzzed with electric focus. She'd spent 6 months perfecting a skyscraper design, a sleek tower of glass and steel that could clinch her architecture firm a billion-dollar contract in New York. At 32, she'd clawed her way up from drafting tables to boardrooms, and this pitch was her shot at the big leagues. Her navy blazer hugged her frame, her laptop bag slung over one shoulder, every step a testament to years of grit. She was exhausted, having pulled an all-nighter tweaking renderings, but the adrenaline of ambition kept her sharp. Her phone vibrated. In her hand, a text from her assistant flashing on the screen. "Knock 'em dead tomorrow, you've got this." She smiled faintly, the stakes sinking in deeper. The terminal hummed with life, travelers dragging suitcases, kids whining, and announcements crackling overhead. Lena weaved through the crowd, her eyes fixed on Gate 47 where her flight to New York awaited. She'd splurged on a first-class ticket, a rare indulgence justified by the meeting's wait. As she approached the boarding area, the jet bridge loomed ahead, a sleek tunnel promising escape from the West Coast grind. A line of passengers shuffled forward, tickets in hand, their faces a mix of boredom and impatience. Lena adjusted her bag, smoothing her hair, ready to step into the next chapter of her career. Then she saw her. Claire Donovan stood at the jet bridge entrance, a towering figure in a crisp navy uniform, her blonde hair pulled into a tight bun that screamed control. Her pale blue eyes flicked over each passenger with mechanical precision, her lips pressed into a thin line that barely passed for a smile. A silver name tag glinted on her chest, catching the harsh airport lights. Lena stepped up, offering her boarding pass with a polite nod. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice steady despite the fatigue tugging at her edges. Claire snatched the ticket, her gaze lingering on Lena a beat too long. She scanned it, then handed it back with a smirk. "Hope you know how to behave up there," she muttered, just loud enough for Lena to catch. The word stung, a jab wrapped in velvet, but Lena brushed it off. Maybe Claire was just having a rough day. She'd dealt with worse. Lena moved past, her shoulders squared, refusing to let the comment fester. The jet bridge sloped downward, cool air brushing her face as she stepped into the plane. The first-class cabin greeted her with plush leather seats and soft lighting, a stark contrast to the cramped economy rows she'd endured for years. She found seat 2A, a window spot near the front, and exhaled. This was her reward, a small slice of comfort after endless hustle. She slid her laptop bag under the seat, then reached up to stow her carry-on in the overhead bin. Her fingers brushed the latch as she hoisted the bag, careful not to jostle the neighboring compartments. She'd just clicked it shut when a shadow fell over her. Claire loomed in the aisle, a coffee pot in hand, her posture stiff as a mannequin. "Need a drink?" she asked, her tone clipped. Lena nodded, sensing the edge but too tired to dwell on it. "Black, please," Claire poured, but as she handed the cup over, her wrist flicked. Hot coffee splashed across Lena's lap, soaking her skirt and scalding her thighs. Lena gasped, jerking back, the cup tumbling to the floor with a dull thud. "Oh my God," she muttered, grabbing napkins from her tray table. Claire's lips curled into a smirk, her eyes glinting with something dark. "Watch yourself," she said, stepping back as if Lena had caused the spill. Heads turned, passengers craning their necks to see the commotion. A white woman in 3B snickered behind her hand, while a man in a suit across the aisle raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Lena dabbed at the stain, her cheeks burning, not from the coffee, but from the weight of those stares. She forced her, breathing to steady, her hands trembling as she wiped the mess. Claire didn't move, just stood there, arms crossed, watching like a predator sizing up prey. "You're making a mess," she announced, her voice loud enough to carry through the cabin. "First class isn't for everyone, you know." The words hit like a slap, sharp and deliberate. Lena froze, napkins crumpled in her fist. She looked up, meeting Claire's gaze, and saw it, the flicker of triumph, the unspoken dare. This wasn't an accident. This was personal. The cabin grew quieter, the hum of the engines filling the void as passengers shifted in their seats. A teenage girl in 1C glanced over, then quickly buried her face in her phone. An older man in a tweed jacket coughed awkwardly, avoiding eye contact. Lena's pulse hammered in her ears, her exhaustion giving way to a slow, simmering anger. She'd faced microaggressions before, clients doubting her credentials, strangers clutching purses tighter when she passed. But this was bolder, rawer. Claire wasn't just rude, she was marking territory, and Lena was the intruder. The coffee, stains spread across her skirt, a dark bloom mirroring the unease pooling in her gut. She straightened, tossing the soggy napkins onto the tray table, and locked eyes with Claire. "That was on purpose," she said, her voice low but firm. Claire tilted her head, feigning confusion. "I don't know what you mean. Accidents happen." Her tone dripped with mockery, a challenge wrapped in innocence. Lena's jaw tightened. She could let it slide, keep her head down, focus on the pitch. That's what she'd always done. Swallowed the slights, proved herself through work. But something snapped this time. Maybe it was the stakes, the years of grinding, or the sheer audacity of Claire's smirk. She wasn't just a passenger here, she was a target. The plane's intercom crackled, a voice announcing boarding completion. Passengers settled in, buckling seatbelts, but the air around Lena felt charged, thick with unspoken tension. Claire turned away, her heels clicking down the aisle, but not before shooting Lena one last look. A warning, a promise. Lena sank into her seat, her damp skirt clinging to her legs, her mind racing. She told herself it was nothing, just a petty jab from a bitter woman. She had a pitch to nail, a future to secure, but deep down she knew. That spill wasn't the end. It was the opening shot. Her fingers brushed her phone, still tucked in her blazer pocket. She pulled it out, checking. The time, 3 hours until New York. Plenty of time to regroup, refocus. The blueprints in her carry-on were safe, her notes intact. She could handle a rude flight attendant. She'd handled worse. But as the plane taxied toward the runway, the engines roaring to life, that smirk lingered in her mind. Claire's words, echoed sharp and cutting. "Hope you know how to behave up there." It wasn't just rudeness, it was a line in the sand, and Lena had unwittingly crossed it. The cabin lights dimmed, the safety video flickering on overhead screens. Lena stared out the window, the tarmac blurring as the plane picked up speed. She tried to shake the unease, to bury it under the weight of her goals. This was just a flight, a means to an end. But her gut twisted, a quiet voice whispering that she'd underestimated Claire. That smirk wasn't random. It was calculated, rooted in something uglier, something Lena knew too well. She'd felt it before, in boardrooms, on streets, in the subtle shifts of strangers' eyes. Prejudice didn't need a reason. It just needed a target. And Claire had found hers. The plane leveled off at cruising altitude, the soft hum of engines vibrating through the cabin as Lena Carter sat rigid in seat 2A, her damp skirt a constant reminder of Claire Donovan's petty assault. The coffee stain had cooled, leaving a sticky residue on her thighs, but the heat in her chest burned hotter with every passing minute. She stared at the seat back in front of her, replaying the spill, the smirk, the snickers from nearby passengers. Her fingers clenched the armrests, nails digging into the leather. She'd spent years perfecting her poise, swallowing slights to keep her focus on the prize. But this, This was different. Claire hadn't just spilled coffee. She'd spilled venom. And Lena felt it seeping into her skin. She glanced around the cabin, catching the fleeting eyes of passengers who'd witnessed the scene. The white woman in 3B, her lips still curled in amusement, scrolled through her phone like nothing had happened. The man in the suit across the aisle adjusted his tie, pretending to read a magazine. Cowards, Lena thought, her stomach twisting. They'd seen it, heard it, but no one spoke up. She wasn't surprised. Silence was the default when you looked like her in spaces like this. First class or not, she was still the outsider. But Claire's smug face flashed in her mind, that taunting, "You're making a mess," and something inside Lena snapped. She wasn't letting this slide. She turned her head, spotting Claire a few rows back, adjusting a tray table with that same mechanical precision. The flight attendant's bun gleamed under the cabin lights, her posture screaming authority. Lena took a deep breath, steadying her voice, and called out, "Excuse me." Claire's head snapped up, her pale eyes narrowing as they locked onto Lena's. The cabin seemed to hush, a ripple of curiosity spreading. Lena straightened in her seat, her damp skirt forgotten. "You did that on purpose," she said, loud enough for the front rows to hear. "The coffee. Apologize." Claire froze for a split second, then let out a sharp barking laugh that sliced through the air. "I don't take orders from you," she shot back, her voice ringing with disdain. Passengers shifted, some leaning forward, others sinking deeper into their seats. The white businessman in 4A chuckled, a low, approving sound that fueled Claire's bravado. She stepped closer, towering over Lena's seat, her shadow stretching across the tray table. "It was an accident, sweetheart. Maybe if you weren't so clumsy, we wouldn't be here." The lie dripped from her lips, smooth and practiced, but her eyes betrayed her, gleaming with a sick satisfaction. Lena's pulse pounded in her ears, her anger surging past the exhaustion. She wasn't buying the act. She'd seen that look before, in boardrooms when colleagues joked about her credentials, on streets when cops slowed their cruisers as she walked by. It was the look of someone who thought they could push her down and walk away clean. Not today. She reached into her blazer pocket, pulling out her phone with a steady hand. "Say that again," she said, tapping record, the red dot blinking, to life. "What's your name? I want it on video." Claire's smirk faltered, just for a heartbeat, before hardening into something colder. "Put that away," she snapped, her voice dropping an octave. "Or I'll have you removed from this flight." The threat hung heavy, a guillotine blade poised to drop. Lena held her ground, the phone steady, her gaze unflinching. "Go ahead, try it, but I'm not the one who'll look bad here." The businessman chuckled again, louder this time, muttering, "She's got guts," to no one in particular. Claire's jaw tightened, her control slipping as the cabin's attention zeroed in. For a moment, it felt like a standoff, Lena's quiet defiance clashing with Claire's bristling authority. Passengers watched, some with wide eyes, others with thinly veiled smirks. Lena's heart raced, but she kept her voice level. She wasn't backing down. Not when she'd worked so hard to earn this seat, this trip, this chance. Claire had picked the wrong target. But just as Lena thought she'd forced a crack in the flight attendant's armor, Claire pivoted, her hand flying to the intercom. On the wall, she pressed the button, her voice shifting to a clipped professional tone. "Captain, we've got a disruptive passenger in first class, requesting assistance." The words hit Lena like a punch to the gut. "Disruptive?" She lowered her phone, stunned, as the cabin buzzed with whispers. The captain's voice crackled back, calm but firm. "Keep it under control up there. I'll send the co-pilot." Claire turned back to Lena, her smirk returning sharper than ever. "You heard him," she said, folding her arms. "Settle down, or you're off this plane." Lena's mouth went dry, her mind scrambling. She'd stood up, spoken out, and now she was the villain? The businessman shook his head, muttering, "Typical," under his breath. The woman in 3B smirked wider, her phone angled as if she might start filming too. Lena sank back into her seat, the phone slipping into her lap, still recording. Her hands shook, not from fear but from a fury she could barely contain. She'd thought she could fight this, expose Claire's pettiness, but the system was already tilting against her. The captain hadn't even asked for her side. Claire had twisted it, flipped the script, and won the round without breaking a sweat. The co-pilot appeared moments later, a lanky guy with a buzz cut, his expression neutral but his eyes sliding past Lena like she was invisible. "Ma'am," he said, voice flat. "Let's not make this a problem. Settle down, and we'll all get to New York in one piece." Settle down. The phrase grated against her, a command to shrink, to disappear. Lena forced a nod, her throat tight, her mind racing. "I'm not the problem here," she said, barely above a whisper, but the co-pilot was already turning away, nodding to Claire like they'd rehearsed it. Claire flashed a triumphant glance, then sauntered back down the aisle, her heels clicking like a victory march. Lena stared at her retreating figure, the damp fabric of her skirt chafing against her skin. She'd tried to stand up, to reclaim her dignity, but Claire had turned it into a weapon. The recording hummed quietly in her lap, proof of something. But what good was it now? The cabin settled into an uneasy quiet, the engine's drone swallowing, the last whispers. Lena's chest ached, a mix of rage and disbelief swirling inside her. She'd faced bias before, but this was a new level, bold, public, and unchecked. Claire wasn't just a rude employee, she was a gatekeeper, wielding her little slice of power like a club. And Lena? She was the target, pinned down before she'd even swung back. Her pitch loomed in her mind, the skyscraper design she'd poured her soul into, but now it felt distant, overshadowed by this fight she hadn't asked for. She glanced at her phone, the red dot still blinking. Maybe it wasn't over yet. Maybe she still had a play. Hey YouTube fam, what do you think? Comment number 1 if you're raging at Claire's power trip and think Lena deserves justice already. Drop a like if you've ever faced someone trying to knock you down for no reason, and subscribe if you're ready to see this showdown explode. Has someone ever twisted your words to make you the bad guy? We've all been there, right? Tell us below. Now buckle up. What's Claire going to pull next to keep Lena in her crosshairs? Could Lena's recording flip this mess upside down, or is she about to crash and burn before New York? Lena Carter sat in seat 2A, her phone resting in her lap, the faint hum of its recording a lifeline she clung to as the plane soared through the night sky. The cabin lights cast soft shadows, and the air smelled faintly of recycled coffee and leather. Her skirt, still damp from Claire Donovan's earlier attack, clung uncomfortably to her thighs, but she pushed the sensation aside. The captain's warning echoed in her mind. Settle down. A bitter pill she'd swallowed to keep her seat. She'd stood up to Claire, demanded accountability, and gotten slapped down for it. The co-pilot's dismissal, the passengers, silence, it all stung, but she told herself the worst was over. She could endure a few more hours, land in New York, and leave this nightmare behind. Her pitch was what mattered. She just had to hold on. The cabin buzzed with low murmurs as passengers settled into the flight's rhythm. Lena glanced out the window, the endless black speckled with stars, trying to refocus. Her blueprints were safe in her carry-on, her notes intact. She could still nail the meeting, still make her mark. But the peace lasted only minutes. A shadow fell over her again, and she looked up to see Claire standing in the aisle, her uniform pristine, her face a mask of calm. She held a stack of blankets, but her eyes locked onto Lena's overhead bin with a glint that made Lena's stomach twist. "Need anything up there?" Claire asked, her voice syrupy, too sweet to trust. Lena shook her head, wary. "I'm fine." Claire ignored her, reaching up with a deliberate slowness. Her fingers brushed the latch of Lena's bin, and before Lena could react, she popped it open. The carry-on bag teetered, then tumbled out, crashing to the floor with a loud thunk. Blueprints spilled across the aisle, white sheets fluttering like wounded birds. Passengers gasped, heads snapping toward the chaos. Lena lunged forward, her heart in her throat, scrambling to gather the papers. These weren't just drawings. They were her future, her sweat, her sleepless nights. She scooped up a rendering of the skyscraper's lobby, its elegant curves smudged with a footprint from someone's shoe. Claire stepped back, her lips curling into that same infuriating smirk. "Oops," she said, loud enough for the cabin to hear. "Guess you're not cut out for first class after all." The words sliced through the air, sharp and mocking, and a ripple of laughter spread from the white woman in 3B. Lena's hands shook as she grabbed another blueprint, her chest tightening. This wasn't an accident. Claire had aimed to hit her where it hurt most. She knelt in the aisle, papers clutched to her chest, when Claire moved closer. The flight attendant's polished shoe hovered over a detailed elevation sketch, then pressed down. The paper crinkled and tore under her weight, the sound like a gunshot in Lena's ears. Lena's head snapped up, her eyes blazing. "Get off that," she said, her voice trembling but fierce. Claire lifted her foot, the torn blueprint sticking to her sole for a moment before fluttering free. "Oh, my mistake," she said, feigning surprise, but her eyes danced with triumph. Lena stood, clutching her ruined work, her breath coming in short bursts. The cabin watched, a mix of shock and amusement flickering across faces. The businessman in 4A leaned forward, his grin widening, while the teenage girl in 1C filmed it all on her phone, her expression unreadable. Lena's mind raced, her pitch was compromised, her dignity trampled, and Claire was reveling in it. "You're targeting me," Lena said, her voice rising, cutting through the murmurs. "Because I'm black. Admit it." The accusation hung, heavy, a truth she'd felt from the first spill but now couldn't deny. Claire's smirk vanished, replaced by a cold, calculated stare. "That's ridiculous," she said, her tone clipped. "I'm just doing my job. You're the one causing trouble." The lie was flimsy, but it didn't matter. Claire's power didn't need truth, just authority. Lena's fists clenched, the torn blueprint crumpling in her grip. She wanted to scream, to shove Claire back, but she knew the rules. One wrong move, and she'd be the disruptive one again. The teenager's phone glinted in the corner of Lena's vision, still recording. Hope flickered. She had a witness, evidence. She turned to the girl, voice steady despite the fury boiling inside. "Keep filming. Everyone needs to see this." The girl nodded, her fingers tightening on the device. Claire's eyes darted to the phone, and for the first time, a crack appeared in her composure. She lunged forward, snatching the device from the girl's hands with a swift, practiced grab. "No filming on my flight," she barked, pocketing the phone. "Security violation. You'll get it back at landing if you're lucky." The girl shrank back, stunned, and Lena's hope crumbled. "That's theft," she said, stepping toward Claire, her voice shaking with rage. "Give it back." Claire spun on her, eyes flashing. "Step off, or I'll have you cuffed before we hit New York." The threat was a sledgehammer, slamming Lena back into her seat. Passengers whispered, some nodding approvingly at Claire's decisiveness, others avoiding Lena's gaze. The businessman muttered, "About time," under his breath, his voice thick with smugness. Lena's chest heaved, her ruined blueprints scattered at her feet, her phone in her lap still recording her own futile stand. Claire turned away, the stolen phone bulging in her pocket, her stride confident as she moved toward the galley. Lena sank into her seat, her hands trembling as she gathered the remaining papers. The elevation sketch was shredded, half the lobby rendering smudged beyond recognition. Her pitch was in tatters, and Claire had stripped her of more than just paper. She'd taken her voice, her proof. The teenager sat silent, her hands empty, her eyes darting nervously to Lena. "I'm sorry," she whispered, barely audible. Lena nodded, forcing a tight smile, but inside, she was drowning. The cabin lights dimmed further, the flight settling into a deceptive calm. Lena stared at the mess in her lap, her mind spinning. She'd called Claire out, named the racism for what it was, and it had only made things worse. The recording on her phone hummed quietly, capturing every word, every tear of paper. But without the girl's video, it felt like a whisper against a storm. Claire had escalated, turned a petty jab into a full-on attack, and Lena was paying the price. Her career hung by a thread, her dignity shredded like her blueprints, and Claire was walking away victorious. She glanced out the window again, the stars blurring as the plane cut through the night. 2 hours to New York. 2 hours to figure out how to salvage this, to fight back. She'd thought standing up would shift the tide, but Claire had doubled down, weaponizing her authority with a ruthlessness Lena hadn't anticipated. The torn blueprint in her hand felt like a metaphor. Her dreams, her hard work, crushed underfoot by someone who saw her as less than human. She tucked her phone deeper into her pocket, the recording her only weapon now. Claire had won this round, but Lena wasn't done. Not yet. The engines droned on, a steady pulse beneath the cabin's tension. Lena's eyes drifted to the galley, where Claire's silhouette moved with purpose, untouchable. She'd underestimated the flight attendant, assumed she could handle a little prejudice with grace. But this wasn't little. This was war, and Claire was playing dirty. Lena's fingers brushed the torn paper, her resolve hardening. She'd lost her evidence, her composure, her edge, but she hadn't lost herself. Not yet. The fight was just beginning, and Claire had no idea what was coming. Lena Carter slumped in seat 2A, the torn remnants of her skyscraper blueprints scattered across her lap like fallen leaves, each smudge and rip a wound to her pride. The cabin lights flickered faintly, casting a sterile glow over the first class section as the plane sliced through the night sky toward New York. Her thighs ached from the cold, damp fabric of her coffee-stained skirt. But the real pain gnawed deeper. Claire Donovan had shredded her work, stolen her proof, and left her, humiliated in front of a plane full of strangers. The recording on her phone, tucked safely in her blazer pocket, hummed quietly, a thin thread of hope she clung to. She'd called out Claire's racism, demanded justice, only to watch the flight attendant twist it into another victory. Lena's chest tightened, her breath shallow, but she told herself to hold on. She could still salvage this. She had to. The cabin buzzed with a restless energy, passengers shifting in their seats, some stealing glances at Lena, others pretending the chaos hadn't happened. The teenage girl in 1C, her phone confiscated by Claire, sat with her arms crossed, her face a mix of guilt and fear. Lena caught her eye, offering a small nod, silent thanks for trying, but the girl looked away, sinking deeper into her seat. The white woman in 3B scrolled her phone, her lips twitching with a smirk, while the businessman in 4A flipped through his magazine, his earlier chuckles now a smug silence. Lena's stomach churned. She was alone in this, surrounded by people who'd rather watch her sink than lift a finger. Then a voice broke the stillness. "That's enough," it said, firm and gravelly, cutting through the cabin's murmur. Lena turned to see an older man in 5C rising from his seat, his tweed jacket rumpled, his silver hair catching the light. His name tag, pinned crookedly to his lapel, read, Ellis. He stepped into the aisle, his weathered face set in a scowl, as he pointed at Claire, who stood near the galley, adjusting a stack of cups with that same infuriating calm. "You give that girl her phone back," he said, his voice carrying a quiet authority. "What you did was wrong, and we all saw it." Claire's head snapped up, her pale eyes narrowing, but the cabin shifted. Heads turned, whispers rippled. The teenager in 1C perked up, her shoulders straightening. Lena's pulse quickened. Someone was finally stepping in. Claire's smirk faltered as Mr. Ellis took another step, his finger jabbing the air. "You can't just take people's property because you don't like being caught. Hand it over." Passengers nodded, a few muttering agreement. The woman in 3B lowered her phone, her amusement fading, while the businessman glanced up, eyebrows raised. For the first time, Claire looked cornered, her hands tightening on the cups. Lena watched, her breath catching. This could change everything. Claire hesitated, her gaze darting around the cabin, then let out a sharp sigh. "Fine," she snapped, pulling the teenager's phone from her pocket and tossing it back to the girl with a flick of her wrist. It landed in her lap and she clutched it wide-eyed. Claire's glare swung to Lena, venomous and unyielding. "Happy now?" she spat, her voice low but laced with fury. Lena didn't flinch, meeting her stare head-on. "Not yet," she said, her tone steady despite the storm inside her. Claire's jaw twitched, but she turned away, retreating to the galley with stiff, angry steps. The cabin exhaled, tension easing as passengers settled back into their routines. Mr. Ellis sat down, giving Lena a curt nod, his expression softening. "You didn't deserve that," he muttered, loud enough for her to hear. Lena forced a tight smile, gratitude mingling with relief. The teenager clutched her phone, whispering, "I got some of it saved," before slipping it into her bag. Whispers spread, supportive ones this time. "She's out of line," a woman in 2C murmured to her husband. "That flight attendant's a bully," a guy in 4B agreed. Lena's chest swelled, a flicker of triumph sparking inside her. She'd been seen, heard, backed up. Maybe this wasn't a lost cause. She pulled her phone from her pocket, checking the recording, still running, capturing every word of Claire's retreat. Evidence, she thought, her mind racing. She needed more than a moral win. She needed action. When the co-pilot passed by, doing his rounds, Lena flagged him down. "I need to report her," she said, keeping her voice low but firm. "She's targeting me, destroying my work, stealing phones. It's not right." The co-pilot, his buzz cut gleaming under the lights, sighed but nodded. "I'll look into it," he said, scribbling something on a notepad. "We'll sort it out when we land. Just keep it calm till then." He walked off, and Lena leaned back, a rush of elation washing over her. An investigation. Accountability. She'd done it, pushed back, and won a round. The cabin lights dimmed further, the flight settling into a quiet hum. Lena gathered her torn blueprints, smoothing them as best she could. The damage was bad, but she could still salvage the pitch. She had backups on her laptop, her notes in the cloud. She'd make it work. Claire's glare lingered in her memory, but for now, the flight attendant was on the ropes. Passengers were on her side, the co-pilot was involved, and the recording was gold. She felt a surge of power, a sense that justice was within reach. She'd turned the tide, or so she thought, her exhaustion giving way to a quiet, fierce hope. But in the galley, Claire stood alone, her hands gripping the counter, her knuckles white. She pulled a phone from her apron, a personal one, not the airline's, and dialed a number with trembling fingers. The line clicked and a man's voice answered, thick with a southern drawl. "What's the problem, Claire?" She glanced toward the cabin, her eyes narrowing as they landed on Lena's seat. "Got a troublemaker," she whispered, her voice dripping with venom. "Black woman in first class, stirring up crap. I need her gone." The man chuckled, low and dark. "Don't worry, darling. We'll handle it. She won't know what hit her." Claire hung up, a slow smile creeping across her face. She slipped the phone back into her apron, her composure returning, sharp and deadly. Lena, oblivious, tucked her phone away, her mind drifting to New York. The co-pilot's promise echoed. Investigation. Justice. She pictured Claire's smug face falling when the airline brass saw the footage, heard the complaints. She'd fought back, rallied support, and it felt good. The cabin's murmurs faded into a soothing backdrop, the engine's drone lulling her into a fragile calm. She closed her eyes, just for a moment, letting the victory sink in. Mr. Ellis's stand, the passengers' whispers, the recording, it all added up to a win. She could breathe again, focus on the pitch, leave this mess behind. The plane soared on, the night stretching endlessly outside the window. Lena's torn blueprints lay in her lap, a battle scar she'd wear proudly. She didn't see Claire emerge from the galley, didn't catch the glint in her eye as she scanned the cabin. She didn't hear the faint click of the flight attendants, phone locking, the call's promise sealed. Lena thought she'd struck a blow, gained ground. She was wrong. Claire wasn't retreating. She was reloading, and the next hit would be harder, darker, more brutal than anything Lena could imagine. The false victory wrapped around her like a blanket, warm and deceptive as the real storm brewed just out of sight. Lena Carter leaned back in seat 2A, her torn blueprints tucked into her laptop bag, her breathing steady for the first time since takeoff. The cabin hummed with the low drone of engines, the air thick with the scent of recycled oxygen and faint perfume. Her damp skirt still clung to her thighs, a nagging reminder of Claire Donovan's earlier attack. But the sting of humiliation had dulled. Mr. Ellis's stand, the passengers' whispers of support, and the co-pilot's promise of an investigation had shifted the tide. Her phone, nestled in her blazer pocket, held a recording that could bury Claire. Every snide remark, every shred of paper captured in digital clarity. She'd fought back, rallied a small army, and won a round. The pitch in New York loomed, her skyscraper design still salvageable, and she let herself believe the worst was behind her. The plane jolted, a sudden lurch as turbulence rattled the cabin. Overhead bins creaked, and passengers gripped their armrests, a ripple of unease, spreading. Lena straightened, her hands tightening on her bag, but the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, smooth and reassuring. "Folks, just a little bump. Stay seated. We'll be through it soon." The shaking subsided, and the cabin settled, the lights flickering briefly before steadying. Lena exhaled, her nerves fraying but her resolve intact. She glanced toward the galley, expecting to see Claire's icy figure, but the flight attendant was nowhere in sight. Good, she thought. Maybe she's finally backing off. The calm lasted mere minutes. Claire emerged from the galley, her uniform, crisp, her bun tighter than ever, a tray of water cups balanced in her hands. Her pale eyes swept the cabin, landing on Lena with a flicker of something dark, too quick to read, too subtle to call out. She moved down the aisle, her steps deliberate, her heels clicking against the carpet. Lena tensed, her instincts prickling, but Claire passed without a word, offering water to the businessman in 4A with a practiced smile. Lena watched her go, her gut whispering warnings she couldn't place. "She's done," she told herself. "I've got the upper hand now." But the air felt heavier, charged with an unseen threat. Claire disappeared into the galley again, and Lena relaxed, her fingers brushing her phone. The recording was her shield, the investigation her sword. She'd make it to New York, nail the pitch, and let the airline deal with Claire. But in the galley, Claire set the tray down with a quiet thud, her hands steady as she reached into her apron. She pulled out a small plastic bag, no bigger than a coin purse, filled with a fine white powder. Her lips curled into a thin, vicious smile as she slipped it into her pocket, her movements swift and silent. She glanced toward the cabin, ensuring no eyes followed, then stepped back into the aisle, her tray abandoned. She approached Lena's row, her posture casual, her voice loud enough to carry. "Routine check," she announced, reaching for the overhead bin above 2A. Lena's head snapped up, alarm flashing through her. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice sharp. Claire ignored her, popping the bin open with a flick of her wrist. She rummaged through Lena's carry-on, her fingers brushing the laptop bag, then froze. "What's this?" she said, pulling out the small bag of powder with a theatrical gasp. She held it high, the white substance glinting under the cabin lights. "Drugs," she shouted, her voice piercing the air. "She's a dealer." The cabin erupted. Passengers recoiled, gasps and murmurs exploding around Lena. The woman in 3B clutched her chest, her eyes wide with fake shock, while the businessman in 4A leaned forward, his grin predatory. "Knew she didn't belong here," he muttered, loud enough for Lena to hear. Lena shot to her feet, her heart slamming against her ribs. "That's not mine," she yelled, her voice cracking with panic. "You planted that." Claire stepped back, clutching the bag like a trophy, her face a mask of outrage. "I found it right here in your bag. Don't lie to me." Lena's mind spun, her breath coming in short, desperate bursts. She lunged for the bag, but Claire jerked it away, her smirk breaking through the feigned horror. "Security risk," she said, turning to the co-pilot, who was already striding down the aisle, alerted by the commotion. "She's a threat. Cuff her." The co-pilot hesitated, his buzz cut gleaming as he glanced between Lena and Claire, but Claire's authority won out. "Now!" she snapped, and he pulled a pair of plastic cuffs from his belt, his face grim, but compliant. Lena's protests drowned in the chaos, passengers shouting, some demanding action, others shrinking back in fear. "Listen to me," Lena pleaded, her hands raised as the co-pilot grabbed her wrist. "She put it there. I'm an architect, not a criminal." But the co-pilot yanked her arms behind her back, the cuffs snapping tight around her wrists. Pain, shot through her shoulders and she stumbled, her torn blueprint spilling again as her bag tipped over. Claire watched, her eyes gleaming with triumph, her earlier defeat forgotten. "Should have stayed quiet," she muttered, just for Lena to hear. The cabin spun, a blur of faces. Mr. Ellis's stunned silence, the teenager's wide-eyed horror, the businessman's smug nod. Lena's world was crumbling, her pitch, her career, her freedom slipping away in an instant. The co-pilot dragged her back to her seat, forcing her down as passengers gawked. "Stay put," he barked, his voice flat. "Police will handle you at landing." Lena's chest heaved, her cuffs cutting into her skin, her mind racing for a way out. She spotted Claire tucking the bag into her apron, her smirk widening as she turned away. This wasn't just revenge, it was a setup, a calculated strike to destroy her. The recording on her phone still hidden in her pocket was useless now. Claire had flipped the script, painted her as a felon. Her dreams of New York, the skyscraper, the billion-dollar deal, they were ash before she'd even landed. The cabin settled into a tense hush, the engines drone a mocking backdrop to Lena's nightmare. She sat cuffed, her head bowed, her torn papers at her feet. Claire had won, turned her stand into a trap, and the passengers had bought it. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from a rage so deep it burned white-hot. She'd thought she'd gained. Ground thought justice was close, but Claire had been 3 steps ahead, plotting this from the shadows. The flight stretched on, the minutes crawling, and Lena's hope bled out with every tick of the clock. "Hey, YouTube crew, how's this hitting you?" Comment number 1 if you're screaming at Claire's dirty move and think Lena's getting screwed by this setup. Drop a like if you've ever been blindsided by someone twisting the truth, and subscribe if you're hooked on seeing how Lena fights this insanity. Was Claire's plant job a shock to you too? How far would you go to clear your name? Tell us, below. Now hold tight. What's Lena going to do cuffed and cornered? Can she claw her way out of this nightmare? Or is Claire's next play even darker? Lena Carter sat in seat 2A, her wrists bound by tight plastic cuffs, the edges biting into her skin as the plane hummed through the night sky toward New York. The cabin lights cast a harsh glow over her torn blueprints, scattered like confetti across the floor, each rip a dagger to her dreams. Her damp skirt clung to her thighs, the coffee stain now a cold, mocking memory. But the real wound was deeper. Claire Donovan had framed her, planted drugs, and turned her into a criminal in front of everyone. The passengers' stares drilled into her, a mix of fear and judgment, while the co-pilot stood nearby. His buzz cut a stark silhouette against the galley's light. Her pitch, her career, her freedom, all slipping away, and Claire's smirk lingered in her mind, a taunting ghost. Panic clawed at her chest, her breath shallow and ragged. She twisted her wrists, the cuffs cutting deeper, but she forced her voice steady. "This isn't mine," she said, loud enough for the front rows to hear. She planted it. "I'm an architect, not a drug dealer." The co-pilot glanced at her, his face a blank slate, but he didn't respond. Passengers shifted, some whispering, others avoiding her gaze. The businessman in 4A sneered, "Sure you are," his voice dripping with sarcasm. Lena's heart pounded. She had to fight this, had to make them see. She pulled her wallet from her blazer pocket with bound hands, fumbling to flip it open. "Look," she said, holding up her ID. "Lena Carter, Carter Designs. I'm on my way to a meeting. This is a setup." The co-pilot took the ID, scanning it with a flicker of doubt. But Claire swooped in, her uniform crisp, her eyes gleaming with fake tears. "She threatened me," she said, her voice trembling just enough to sell it. "Said she'd ruin me if I didn't back off. I found the drugs. She's dangerous." The tears were a masterstroke, her face crumpling as she clutched the planted bag like a shield. Passengers gasped, the woman in 3B nodding as if she'd known all along. The co-pilot handed the ID back, his jaw tightening. "Save it for the police," he said, turning away. Lena's stomach dropped. Claire's act was working, and she was drowning in it. But she wasn't alone. Mr. Ellis, the older man in 5C, stood again, his tweed jacket creased, his voice cutting through the noise. "That's a lie," he said, pointing at Claire. "She's been after this girl since we boarded. I saw her plant that bag. Check the bin. It's not even hers. A few passengers murmured agreement. The teenager in 1C, her hands trembling, nodded fiercely. She took my phone too, the girl added, her voice small but clear. Lena's hope flared. Witnesses. Allies. She twisted toward the co-pilot. Listen to them. She's framing me because I called her out. The co-pilot hesitated, his eyes darting between Claire and the growing unrest. But Claire's sobs grew louder, drowning Lena out. The cabin tilted, a sea of faces swaying between doubt and condemnation. The businessman scoffed. She's just playing the victim, while the woman in 2C whispered to her husband, something's off here. Lena's mind raced. She had one shot left. Her phone, still recording in her pocket, was her lifeline. She couldn't reach it with cuffed hands, but she could feel its weight against her chest. If she could upload it, get it out, someone might see the truth. She shifted, pressing her elbow against the armrest, nudging the phone free. It slid into her lap, the screen glowing faintly, the red dot still blinking. She angled her body, hiding it from Claire's view, and tapped the screen with her chin, her movements clumsy, but desperate. The upload bar flickered to life, sinking to her cloud. Her pulse surged, evidence escaping this metal cage. She kept talking, buying time. Check my bag, she said to the co-pilot. No drugs, no nothing. She's lying. Claire's head snapped toward her tears drying, fast as she caught the glow of the phone. What's that? She hissed, lunging forward. Lena jerked back, but Claire was faster, her hand darting out to snatch the device. She held it up, her eyes flashing with fury, then smashed it against the armrest with a sickening crunch. Glass. Splintered, the screen going black, and Claire tossed it to the floor, stomping it for good measure. No tricks, she snarled, her voice low and venomous. Lena's breath caught, her last hope shattering under Claire's heel. The upload had it finished? She couldn't tell, the screen a mangled wreck at her feet. The cabin erupted, passengers shouting over each other. Mr. Ellis surged forward. You can't do that, while the teenager cried out, she's covering it up. The co-pilot grabbed Claire's arm, pulling her back, his face flushed with confusion. Enough, he barked. But the damage was done. Lena sat frozen, her wrists throbbing, her phone in pieces. Her evidence, her fight, gone. Claire stepped back, brushing her hands on her apron, her smirk returning as the chaos swirled around her. The cabin descended into a shouting match, Mr. Ellis demanding action, the businessman yelling for order, the teenager sobbing into her hands. Lena's head spun, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall. She'd had proof. A chance, and Claire had crushed it in seconds. The co-pilot raised his hand, silencing the crowd. Everyone sit down, he said, his voice strained. We'll deal with this at landing. He turned to Lena, his eyes hard. You, stay put. She nodded, numb, her wrists aching as she sank deeper into the seat. Claire retreated, her heels clicking triumphantly, leaving Lena cuffed and broken. The engines droned on, a relentless pulse beneath the cabin's tension. Lena stared at the wreckage of her phone, glass shards glinting in the dim light. Had the upload gone through? She couldn't know, couldn't check. Her blueprints lay trampled, her pitch a distant dream, her freedom hanging by a thread. Claire had escalated again, turned her defiance into a felony, and the passengers were split. Some on her side, others against her, but none with the power to stop this. Her chest heaved, rage and despair warring inside her. She'd fought so hard, rallied support, only to watch Claire snatch it all away with one brutal swing. The flight stretched on, the minutes dragging like hours. Lena's hands trembled in the cuffs, her mind racing for a new play, but she was trapped, physically, legally, emotionally. Claire had outmaneuvered her, turned her stand into a noose. The co-pilot stood watch, his presence a wall she couldn't breach. Mr. Ellis sat back, his face etched with frustration, while the teenager wiped her eyes, her small rebellion snuffed out. Lena's hope flickered, a dying ember in the dark. She'd thought she could win, thought she'd exposed Claire, but the flight attendant was relentless. a predator who thrived on her prey's despair. The cabin lights dimmed, the plane cutting through the night like a blade. Lena's eyes drifted to the wreckage at her feet, her phone, her blueprints, her dignity. She'd been so close, so sure she'd turned the tide. Now she was cuffed, accused and alone, Claire's victory sealed in the crunch of broken glass. But deep down, a spark lingered. Rage, not surrender. She didn't know if the upload had worked, didn't know if anyone would hear her truth. But she knew one thing. Claire hadn't broken her yet. The fight was slipping, but it wasn't over. Lena Carter sat cuffed in seat 2A, her wrists raw from the plastic biting into her skin, the wreckage of her phone glinting at her feet like a shattered lifeline. The plane's engines thrummed steadily, a cruel contrast to the chaos unfolding around her. Her torn blueprints lay trampled in the aisle, her coffee-stained skirt a cold weight against her thighs. But the real blow was the silence, her recording destroyed, her voice snuffed out by Claire Donovan's ruthless hand. The co-pilot stood nearby, his buzz cut a stark outline in the dim cabin light, his presence a wall she couldn't breach. She'd fought, rallied allies, only to watch Claire flip the script, framing her as a drug dealer with a bag of white powder planted in her carry-on. Her pitch, her career, her freedom, all teetered on the edge of ruin. Claire emerged from the galley, her uniform pristine, her blonde bun gleaming as she strode down the aisle with predatory grace. Her pale eyes swept the cabin, landing on Lena with a smirk that promised more pain. She stopped midway, raising her voice to carry over the engine's drone. "Listen up," she said, her tone shifting to a practiced mix of authority and fear. "This woman's a threat. I found drugs in her bag. She's a criminal, and she's putting us all at risk." She held up the planted bag, shaking it for effect, her face a mask of righteous indignation. Passengers stirred, their murmurs swelling into a wave of unease. Lena's heart slammed against her ribs, her voice hoarse but defiant. "That's a lie, she planted it, I'm innocent." But Claire's words had already taken root. The businessman in 4A stood, his suit rumpled, his face flushed with anger. "She doesn't belong here," he shouted, jabbing a finger at Lena. "First class isn't for people like her, get her out." His words hit like a brick, raw and unfiltered, the racism laid bare. The woman in 3B nodded, her earlier smirk replaced by a grimace of disgust. "I knew she was trouble," she said, loud enough for the rows behind to hear. Whispers turned to shouts, a mob mentality igniting, fast and fierce. Lena shrank back, the cuffs pinning her arms, her breath catching as the cabin tilted against her. Faces blurred, some gawking, others sneering, a few turning away in shame. The teenager in 1C clutched her empty hands, her eyes wide with terror, while Mr. Ellis surged to his feet again, his tweed jacket flapping. "Stop this!" he yelled, his voice cracking with fury. "She's no criminal, you're being played!" He stepped into the aisle, pointing at Claire, but the businessman shoved past him, bellowing, "Sit down, old man, she's a liar. And you're blind." The crowd roared, some cheering, others demanding action, the noise swallowing Mr. Ellis's pleas. Claire seized the moment, her voice rising over the chaos. "He's aiding her," she accused, pointing at Mr. Ellis. "He's part of this, helping a felon." The co-pilot spun around, his face hardening as he grabbed Mr. Ellis's arm. "Back to your seat," he barked, pulling out another pair of cuffs. Mr. Ellis resisted, his silver hair wild, but the co-pilot wrestled him down, snapping the restraints on with a click. "You're wrong!" Mr. Ellis shouted, his voice muffled as he was forced into 5C, his hands bound. Lena's stomach lurched, her one ally silenced, cuffed, just like her. The mob surged, passengers standing yelling over each other. "Throw her off!" a man in 6B hollered, his face red with rage. "She's dangerous!" a woman in 2C added, clutching her husband's arm. Lena's blueprints crunched underfoot as people shifted, some stepping into the aisle, others trampling her. Work in the frenzy. A detailed rendering of the skyscraper's spire tore in half under a heavy boot, the paper fluttering like ash. Her dreams, her months of labor, were dust now, crushed by a crowd Claire had whipped into a lynch mob. Lena's chest heaved, her Eyes stinging with tears, she fought back. "I didn't do this," she screamed. But her voice was a whisper against the storm. Claire stood at the center, her arms crossed, her smirk widening as the cabin turned on Lena. She'd flipped the script again, turned allies into enemies, and painted Lena as the villain. The co-pilot raised his hands, shouting, "Enough! Sit down!" But the damage was done. Passengers settled reluctantly, their glares fixed on Lena, their mutters a low, menacing hum. The businessman leaned back, satisfied, while the woman in 3B snapped a photo, her lips curling. Mr. Ellis sat cuffed, his head bowed, his fight snuffed out. Lena's hands shook, the cuffs cutting deeper, her body trapped in a nightmare she couldn't escape. But in the chaos, a small figure moved unnoticed. Mia, a young woman in 7A with dark braids and a quiet presence, had watched it all. Claire's plant, the mob's turn, the crushing of Lena's phone. She'd stayed silent, her phone hidden in her lap, the screen glowing faintly. While the cabin roared, she'd pulled up the teenager's earlier video, sent to her via a quick Bluetooth drop before Claire smashed Lena's device. Her fingers flew, texting the footage to a friend at a news outlet. Her message short: "This is real. Get it out now." She whispered under her breath, "I've got you." Her eyes darting to Lena, who sat oblivious, cuffed and broken. The plane droned on, the cabin settling into a tense, simmering quiet. Lena stared at the floor, her torn papers a graveyard of her ambition. The mob had turned, Claire's lies sinking deep, and her allies were gone. Mr. Ellis bound, the teenager, silenced. Her pitch was a distant memory, her freedom a fading hope. The co-pilot stood watch, his face unreadable, while Claire retreated to the galley, her heels clicking like a victor's march. Lena's head pounded, her wrists throbbing, her mind a whirlwind of despair. She'd thought she'd fought back, thought she'd won something, but Claire had turned the plane into a battlefield and Lena was losing badly. The air grew heavier, the passengers' glares a weight she couldn't shake. She'd faced bias before, felt the sting of being other, but this was a new beast. Public, vicious, a mob fueled by Claire's venom. Her phone's shards glinted. At her feet, a mocking reminder of her failed stand. Had the upload worked? She didn't know, couldn't know, and it didn't matter now. The cabin had judged her, condemned her, and Claire had orchestrated it all with a flick of her wrist. Lena's chest ached, a hollow rage burning inside her. She was trapped, outnumbered, her fight reduced to rubble. The flight stretched on, the minutes crawling, the engines hum a relentless taunt. Lena's eyes drifted to Mr. Ellis, his bound hands a mirror of her own, his defiance crushed. The teenager sat hunched, her spirit broken. The mob had won, Claire's power absolute. Lena's hope flickered, a candle in a gale, but it didn't die. Not yet. Mia's quiet move, unseen and unheard, was a spark in the dark. A spark Lena didn't know existed. The cabin settled, the passengers' anger simmering into a cold, collective disdain. But something was shifting, just beyond Lena's reach. Claire had turned the mob, but the game wasn't over. Lena Carter sat cuffed in seat 2A, her wrists bruised and throbbing, the plastic restraints a cruel shackle as the plane began its descent into New York. The cabin lights flared briefly, signaling the end of the flight, but for Lena, it was the start of a nightmare. Her torn blueprints lay crumpled at her feet, her smashed phone a pile of glass and metal, her dreams of the billion-dollar pitch crushed under the weight of Claire Donovan's frame-up. The passengers' glares lingered, a cold mix of fear and contempt, their mob fury now a simmering disdain. Mr. Ellis, cuffed in 5C, sat silent, his silver hair disheveled, his fight snuffed out. The co-pilot stood watch, his buzz cut a rigid shadow, while Claire moved through the aisle, her uniform crisp, her smirk a blade twisting in Lena's gut. The plane shuddered as it touched down at JFK, tires screeching against the tarmac, the engines winding down to a low growl. Lena's heart pounded, her breath shallow. She'd thought she'd hit rock bottom, but this was worse. The intercom crackled, the captain's voice flat. "Welcome to New York. Remain seated until we're..." At the gate, passengers stirred, gathering bags. but the co-pilot blocked the aisle, his eyes fixed on Lena. "You're with me," he said, his tone clipped. Before she could speak, the jet bridge door swung open, and a swarm of police officers stormed aboard, their boots thumping against the carpet, radios crackling with static. Claire stepped forward, her face a mask of triumph, pointing at Lena. "That's her," she said, her voice loud and clear. "Drug possession, threatening behavior. She's a danger." The lead officer, a burly man with a shaved head, nodded, his hand resting on his holster. "Lena Carter," he barked, grabbing her arm. She stumbled to her feet, the cuffs jerking her wrists, her voice desperate. "This is a setup. She planted it. I'm innocent." But the officer ignored her, yanking her into the aisle. Passengers gawked, some whispering, others snapping photos. The businessman in 4A grinning like he'd won a bet. Mr. Ellis shouted, "She's lying!" But another cop silenced him, keeping him cuffed in his seat. Lena's legs shook as they dragged her off the plane, her torn blueprints left behind, her laptop bag abandoned in the chaos. The jet bridge echoed with their footsteps, the cold air of the terminal hitting her like a slap. She twisted, pleading, "Check the footage. There's proof. She framed me." But the officers didn't flinch, their grips iron as they hauled her through the bustling airport. Travelers stared, a sea of curious eyes, and Lena's chest burned with shame and rage. Her pitch meeting was slipping away, her career unraveling with every step. They shoved her into a holding cell near the baggage claim, the metal door slamming shut with a clang that echoed in her skull. She sank onto the bench, her cuffed hands trembling, her breath coming in short gasps. The cell stank of sweat and bleach. The walls scratched with graffiti, a flickering bulb overhead casting jagged shadows. Her pitch was gone. 9:30 in the morning and she was here locked up, accused of a felony she didn't commit. Her firm would drop her, the billion-dollar contract would vanish, and Claire had done it all with a smirk and a bag of powder. Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them back, her jaw clenching. She'd fought so hard, rallied support, only to end up here. Caged, powerless, her future ash. The cell door creaked, and Lena looked up, expecting another cop. Instead, Claire stood there, framed by the bars, her blonde bun gleaming under the harsh light. "Well," she said, her voice dripping with venom, "looks like you'll never work again." Her smirk widened, her eyes glinting with a sick joy. "Should have stayed in your place." Lena surged to her feet, the cuffs rattling, her voice raw. "You won't get away with this." Claire laughed, a sharp cutting sound. "Oh, I already have. Enjoy your new life, sweetheart." She turned to leave, but not before a man stepped into view. Tall, broad-shouldered, his suit crisp, his face shadowed but familiar. "Good job, Claire," he said, his drawl thick, his tone smug. "Told you we'd handle her." Lena froze, her blood running cold. That voice, she'd heard it on Claire's call, the man who'd promised to handle this troublemaker. Claire's uncle, she realized, her mind racing. He wasn't just some supervisor, he was high up, an airline exec with the power to bury this. The man glanced at her, his eyes cold, then walked off with Claire, their footsteps fading down the hall. Lena sank back onto the bench, her head spinning. They'd rigged it. Claire's frame-up, the police, the silence. It was a machine, and she was caught in its gears. Her hope bled out, her fight reduced to a whisper in a locked cell. But outside, the world was shifting. Mia, the quiet woman in 7A, had slipped off the plane unnoticed, her phone buzzing with a reply from her news contact. "Video's live. It's blowing up." The footage, the teenager's clip of Claire planting the drugs, Lena's pleas, hit the internet like wildfire, racking up thousands of views in minutes. News vans screeched into JFK, reporters swarming the terminal, protesters gathering with signs reading, "Justice for Lena." The video spread, a raw, unfiltered truth Claire couldn't touch but Lena didn't know. She sat in the cell, her head bowed, her cuffs a weight she couldn't shake, believing she'd lost everything. The minutes dragged, the cell's silence suffocating. Lena's mind replayed it all, The coffee, the blueprints, the drugs, the mob. Claire's uncle had power, strings to pull, and she was the scapegoat. Her pitch meeting ticked past, her firm likely writing her off. She was alone, betrayed by a system that saw her as disposable. The bulb flickered, casting her shadow against the wall, a broken figure in a broken fight. She didn't hear the chants outside, didn't see the screens lighting up with her story. Claire had trapped her, and the landing was just the start of the fall. Hey YouTube fam, what's your take on this twist? Comment number 1 if you're fuming at Claire's uncle pulling strings and think Lena's getting crushed by this corrupt trap. Drop a like if you've ever felt the system stack the deck against you, and subscribe if you're locked in to see how this explodes. Did Claire's power play shock you, or did you see it coming? How would you fight back from a cell? Tell us below. Now brace yourselves. What's brewing outside that cell? Can a viral video flip this nightmare, or is Lena's doom sealed tight? Lena Carter sat on the cold bench of the JFK holding cell, her wrists bruised beneath the plastic cuffs, her body slumped against the scratched wall. The flickering bulb overhead buzzed like a dying insect, casting jagged shadows across the concrete floor. Her coffee-stained skirt clung to her thighs, her torn blueprints a distant memory left on the plane, her smashed phone a useless pile of glass back in seat 2A. The pitch meeting she'd spent months preparing for, 9:30 in the morning, had come and gone, her billion-dollar dream slipping through her fingers while Claire Donovan and her uncle orchestrated her ruin. The cell's silence pressed in, heavy with despair, her fight reduced to a faint pulse in her chest. She'd been framed, cuffed and locked away, her pleas drowned by a system rigged against her. Outside, the terminal buzzed with chaos she couldn't hear. Mia's video, the raw footage of Claire planting the drugs, Lena's desperate stand, had exploded online, racking up millions of views in hours. News vans lined the curb at JFK, their satellite dishes piercing the morning sky, reporters shouting over each other as protesters swarmed the gates. Signs bobbed in the crowd. Justice for Lena, end airline racism, their chants, echoing through the glass walls. The story broke on every major outlet, headlines screaming, "Flight attendant frames black woman in viral scandal." Twitter lit up, hashtags trending, and Lena's name became a rallying cry. But inside, though, cell, she knew none of it. She sat alone, her head bowed, believing Claire had won. The cell door clanged open, and a new officer stepped in, a woman with short curls and a clipboard. "Lena Carter?" she asked, her voice brisk but not unkind. Lena looked up, her eyes bleary, and nodded. "You're out," the officer said, pulling a key from her belt. "Charges dropped. Let's go." Lena blinked, her mind sluggish. "What?" she rasped, her throat dry. The officer unlocked the cuffs, the plastic snapping. "Free." And Lena rubbed her wrists, red welts pulsing with pain. "Video hit the news," the officer explained, helping her stand. "Whole world's seen it. You're clear." Lena stumbled to her feet, dazed, her legs shaky as the words sank in. Video? Freedom? She staggered into the terminal, the roar of the crowd hitting her like a wave. News cameras swiveled, lights flashing in her face, reporters shouting questions she couldn't process. "Lena, how does it feel to be free?" What's next after the airline's betrayal? She shielded her eyes, her mind reeling. Someone had gotten the truth out. The teenager's footage, maybe her own upload, had escaped Claire's grasp. Protesters cheered as she emerged, their voices a wall of sound, and her phone buzzed in. Her pocket, replaced by a cop, synced to her cloud, alive with notifications. Her firm's CEO had texted, "Saw the video. We're suing the airline. Pitch is back on. Call me." Lena's chest swelled, a rush of elation breaking through the fog. She was out, her name cleared, her career salvaged. The video had turned the tide, exposed Claire's lies to millions. She pushed through the crowd, reporters trailing her, and spotted Claire near the gate, surrounded by airline staff. The flight attendant's bun was frayed, her uniform wrinkled, her face pale as a supervisor barked orders. "You're suspended," he snapped, and Claire's eyes darted to Lena, wide with shock. Lena strode over, her legs steady now, her voice cutting through the noise. "You're finished," she said, locking eyes with Claire. "The world knows what you did." Claire's smirk cracked, her composure shattering as she hissed, "This isn't over." Her voice trembled, a mix of rage and fear, but Lena didn't flinch. "It is for you," she shot back, turning away as the crowd roared louder. Claire lunged after her, but security grabbed her arms, pulling her back. She vanished into the throng, her suspension a public humiliation, her power stripped. Lena stood tall, the terminal's chaos swirling around her, a victor in a fight she'd thought she'd lost. Her phone buzzed again. Her assistant. "Meeting rescheduled for noon. You've got this." She smiled, faint but real, tasting triumph for the first time in hours. The news crews followed her to the curb, microphones thrust in her face, but she waved them off, needing air, needing space. Her firm was suing, the airline scrambling, and Claire was out, for now. She hailed a cab, sliding into the back seat, the city's skyline looming ahead. The driver glanced at her in the mirror. "You're that woman from the plane, right? Saw you on TV, hell of a fight." Lena nodded, exhaustion settling in, but pride flickered too. She'd survived, won, turned Claire's trap into her own redemption. The cab pulled away, JFK fading behind her, and she let herself breathe, believing the storm was over. But Claire wasn't done. Back at the terminal, she slipped away from the staff, her suspension a slap she wouldn't take lying down. She ducked into a restroom, pulling her personal phone from her apron, her hand shaking as she dialed her uncle. "They've got me," she whispered, her voice tight. "She's free, and I'm out." The drawl came back, calm but icy. "Don't panic, Claire. I've got a team, private security. She won't last long." Claire's eyes gleamed, a twisted hope sparking. "Make it quiet," she said, hanging up, her smirk creeping back. She adjusted her bun, smoothed her uniform, and slipped into the crowd, a predator plotting her next strike. Lena, oblivious, stared out the cab window, the city blurring past. Her phone lit up with calls, her CEO, her assistant, friends, but she silenced them, needing a moment to process. The video had saved her, turned a cell into a spotlight, and she felt invincible. Her pitch was back, her name a symbol of justice, and Claire was down. She leaned back, the cab's leather creaking, her wrists still aching but her spirit soaring. She'd face the mob, the cuffs, the lies, and come out on top. The airline would pay, Claire would fade, and Lena would rise, stronger, sharper, unstoppable. The cab rolled through Manhattan, the skyscrapers towering like sentinels, her design soon to join them. She didn't see the black van trailing 2 cars back, its tinted windows hiding masked figures, their radios crackling with her location. Claire's uncle had moved fast, his private team mobilized, their orders clear. Silence her, end the lawsuit, bury the story. Lena's victory glowed bright, a beacon in the dark, but it was fragile, a flame flickering in a wind she didn't feel. The city swallowed her cab, the van closing in, and the counterstrike she'd claimed was about to meet a counterstrike she couldn't imagine. The noon meeting loomed, her chance to reclaim it all, and Lena's mind sharpened, plotting her next moves. She didn't hear the van's engine, didn't see the shadows shifting behind her. Claire's hiss, "This isn't over," echoed faintly in her memory, a warning she'd dismissed. The cab turned onto Fifth Avenue, the world buzzing with her story, but danger lurked just out of sight. Her triumph was real, her freedom earned, but it hung by a thread, and Claire's next play was already in motion, dark and deadly, waiting to strike. Lena Carter leaned against the worn leather of the cab seat, her bruised wrists throbbing faintly as the New York skyline blurred past the window. The city's pulse thrummed through the glass, honking horns, flashing lights, the distant wail of sirens. But inside, she felt a fragile calm. Her coffee-stained skirt clung to her thighs, a battle scar from Claire Donovan's first strike. But the weight of the holding cell was lifting. The viral video had freed her, turned her nightmare into a public triumph, and her firm's CEO had resurrected her pitch meeting for noon. Her phone buzzed incessantly, texts from her assistant, calls from reporters, but she silenced it, savoring the victory. Claire was suspended, the airline was reeling, and Lena was back in the game, stronger than ever. She didn't see the black van trailing 2 cars behind, its tinted windows hiding a threat she couldn't fathom. The cab weaved through Manhattan, traffic, the skyscrapers casting long shadows across the streets. Lena's mind sharpened, replaying her design, the sleek tower of glass and steel that could clinch the billion-dollar deal. She'd salvaged her laptop from the airport chaos, her backups intact, and the noon meeting was her shot to reclaim it all. She glanced at her watch. 11:15. Plenty of time. The driver hummed a tune, oblivious to the storm she'd survived, and she let herself smile, a flicker of pride breaking through the exhaustion. Claire's smirk, her uncle's drawl, they'd lost. She'd won. The cab turned onto a quieter side street, the bustle fading, and Lena relaxed, believing the worst was behind her. Then the world exploded. A deafening crash jolted the cab, metal crunching as the black van slammed into its rear. Lena lurched forward, her head smacking the seat back, pain bursting behind her eyes. The driver cursed, slamming the brakes, but before he could react, the van's doors flew open. 3 masked men spilled out, clad in black, their movements swift and precise. "Out!" one barked, yanking the cab door open, his gloved hand gripping a baton. Lena's heart slammed against her ribs, her breath catching as another man dragged, the driver from his seat tossing him to the pavement like a rag doll. "What the hell?" she screamed, scrambling for her phone. But the first man lunged, pinning her arms. He ripped the phone from her hand, smashing it against the dashboard with a crack that echoed her earlier loss. "No calls," he growled, his voice muffled behind the mask, his eyes cold through the slits. Lena kicked, her heels scraping his shin, but he slammed her back into the seat, the baton cracking against her ribs. Pain flared, stealing her breath, and she gasped, "Who are you?" The third man loomed outside, his fist shattering her laptop on the curb, shards of plastic and metal raining onto the asphalt. "Drop the lawsuit," he snarled, leaning in close, his breath hot against her ear. "Or you're dead." Lena's mind raced, her vision swimming as the pieces clicked. Claire's uncle, the drawl on the phone, the promise to handle her. This wasn't random, it was revenge, a brutal escalation from the airline's inner circle. She twisted, elbowing, the man pinning her, and broke free, tumbling onto the street. Her knees scraped the pavement, blood seeping through her skirt. But she ran, adrenaline surging. The men shouted, boots pounding behind her, and she darted into an alley, her lungs burning. A dumpster loomed ahead, and she ducked behind it, her chest heaving, her hands shaking as she pressed against the cold metal. The men's footsteps slowed, their voices low and furious. "Find her," one snapped, and Lena held her breath, her ribs screaming with every inhale. She peeked out, spotting them fanning across the alley, their batons glinting in the dim light. Her phone was gone, her laptop destroyed, her backups, her pitch, her evidence, all dust. She'd escaped the cell, reclaimed her life, only to be hunted like prey. Claire's hiss, "This isn't over," rang in her ears, a prophecy fulfilled. The men drew closer, their shadows stretching toward her hiding spot, and she pressed deeper into the filth, her hope fraying. A siren wailed in the distance, faint but growing, and the men froze. "Cops," one muttered, and they bolted, piling into the van with a screech of tires. Lena waited, her body trembling, until the alley fell silent. She stumbled out, blood streaking her legs, her blazer torn, and flagged a passing car. "Police station," she gasped, collapsing into the back seat as a stunned driver sped off. At the precinct, she filed a report, her voice steady despite the pain. "They attacked me, said drop the lawsuit or I'm dead. It's the airline, Claire Donovan's people." The officer scribbled, his face grim. But when she checked later, the file was lost. Bribes from Claire's uncle, she realized. Her stomach sinking. Her firm called as she left the station, the CEO's voice tight. "Lena, we saw the attack online. Someone filmed it. But the contract's off. Too much heat." Her victory unraveled, the lawsuit her lifeline. But the firm bailed, fearing scandal. She stood on the precinct steps, battered and alone, her pitch gone, her career back to square one. Claire resurfaced that night on a local news channel, her bun perfect, her tears rehearsed. "I'm the victim," she sobbed, flipping the narrative. "She framed me, ruined my life." The anchor nodded, and Lena's blood boiled. Claire had turned her ambush into a shield, painting herself the martyr. The city buzzed around her, indifferent to her collapse. She'd escaped the van, filed the report, but the system betrayed her again. Cops bought, firms spooked, Claire spinning lies. Her wrists ached, her ribs pulsed, her dreams shattered on a Manhattan curb. She'd thought the video was her salvation, her counterstrike a knockout, but Claire's uncle had struck back harder, his reach deeper than she'd imagined. The lawsuit hung by a thread, her only weapon, but without her firm, it felt futile. She hailed another cab, her body screaming. Her spirit battered. Claire was winning again, her venom seeping through the cracks. The cab rolled through the dusk, the skyline mocking her with its grandeur. She'd been so close, freed from the cell, poised for triumph, only to be ambushed, stripped of everything. The men's words echoed. "Drop the lawsuit, or you're dead." A threat she couldn't ignore. Her phone, replaced at the station, buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Next time we finish it." Her hands shook, fear mingling with rage. Claire's uncle wasn't bluffing, and she was exposed, a target with no shield. The cab stopped at a cheap motel, her temporary refuge, and she stumbled inside, locking the door, her victory a hollow shell. The night pressed in, the motel's thin walls creaking, her mind racing. She'd survived the plane, the cell, the mob, and now this. But at what cost? Her pitch was dead, her firm gone, her safety a mirage. Claire's face on TV burned, in her memory the lies a fresh wound. She'd thought she'd turned the tables, thought justice had teeth, but the ambush had flipped it all, leaving her broken and hunted. The lawsuit was her last stand, but with no backup, it felt like a scream into the void. She sank onto the bed, her body aching, her resolve fraying, unaware that Claire's next move was already in motion. Darker and deadlier than the last, Lena Carter sat on the sagging motel bed, her bruised wrists cradled in her lap, the cheap room's stale air thick with the scent of mildew and desperation. The neon sign outside buzzed faintly, casting a sickly green glow through the thin curtains, illuminating the peeling wallpaper and stained carpet. Her coffee-stained skirt hung limp on her frame, her blazer torn from the ambush, her body a map of pain, ribs aching from the baton, knees scabbed from the alley. Her new phone, a bare-bones replacement from the precinct, sat silent on the nightstand. Its single text, "Next time we finish it," a cold threat from Claire Donovan's uncle. Her pitch was dead, her firm had bailed, and the lawsuit against the airline felt like a lifeline fraying in her hands. She'd survived the plane, the cell, the mob, and the van, but now she was breaking, her spirit teetering on the edge. The city hummed beyond the walls, indifferent to her collapse. She'd escaped the masked men hours ago, filed a report that vanished into a corrupt void, and watched Claire twist the narrative on TV, sobbing as the victim of Lena's lies. Her victory, the viral video, her release, had crumbled under the uncle's brutal counterstrike, leaving her hunted and alone. She pressed her palms to her eyes, fighting the tears that threatened to spill, her mind racing for a way out. She couldn't run. The threat was clear, the next hit fatal. She couldn't hide forever, not with no money, no firm, no pitch. But she couldn't surrender either. Claire had taken everything, and Lena's rage burned hotter than her fear. She pulled her phone closer, its cracked screen glowing as she scrolled through news alerts. The ambush footage, caught by a bystander, had leaked online, sparking outrage, but the airline's PR machine spun it as unrelated violence, distancing Claire and her uncle. Lena's jaw clenched. She needed more, something to hit back, harder. She opened her cloud account, digging through old files, her fingers trembling as she searched for leverage. Then she found it, a folder labeled Research, forgotten from months ago when she'd pitched a project near the airline's hub. Inside were complaints, dozens of them, against Claire Donovan, buried by the airline, all hushed up by a single name, Richard Hargrove, her uncle, a VP with a trail of silenced voices. Lena's pulse surged, her breath catching. The complaints spanned years: harassment, racial slurs, passengers bullied into silence, all swept under Hargrove's rug. She skimmed one from a black man in Atlanta, accused of disrupting a flight after Claire lost his bag, eerily familiar. Another from a Latina woman in Dallas, humiliated over a spilled drink, her complaint misfiled. Lena's hands shook. This wasn't just Claire. It was a pattern, a system, and Hargrove was the linchpin. She forwarded the files to a journalist friend, her message short: "Expose this, now." The upload ticked complete, and she leaned back, a flicker of triumph cutting through the despair. She'd struck a blow, turned Claire's history into a weapon. The story broke hours later, a bombshell on every screen. Headlines screaming Airline VP buries racism complaints. The complaints laid bare for millions. Protesters flooded JFK again, chants echoing through the night, and the feds launched a probe, their spotlight searing. Lena watched it unfold on her phone, motel TV flickering with live coverage. Claire's face flashed, arrested at her apartment, her bun undone, her eyes wild as cops cuffed her. Hargrove's name followed, his office raided, his power crumbling. Lena's chest swelled. She'd done it, flipped the script, crushed them both. She stood pacing the cramped room, her pain forgotten, believing she'd won. But the victory was fleeting. Her phone buzzed, an alert. Claire Donovan released, on bail. Lena froze, her blood icing over. Hargrove's money, his connections, had sprung her fast, and the news cut to Claire leaving the precinct, her smirk back, her uncle at her side. They vanished into a waiting car, the feed losing them in the city's sprawl. Lena's triumph curdled into dread. Claire wasn't done, and Hargrove's reach was deeper than the feds could touch. She sank onto the bed, her hands trembling, the motel's silence pressing in. She'd exposed them, sparked a fire, but they were free, plotting. And she was still the target. Then the night erupted. A deafening boom shook the room, the window shattering inward as flames roared through the curtains. Lena screamed, diving to the floor, glass slicing her palms as fire licked the walls. Smoke choked her lungs, thick and black, and she crawled toward the door, her ribs screaming with every move. The motel was burning, her room, her refuge, torched in an instant. She kicked the door open, stumbling into the parking lot, coughing, her eyes streaming as the blaze swallowed her shelter. Sirens wailed, distant but closing, and she staggered to her feet, blood dripping from her hands, her phone clutched tight. Cops and firefighters swarmed, hoses blasting the inferno, but Lena knew this was no accident. Claire's uncle had struck again, his private team turning her hideout to ash. She told the police, her voice raw, "It's them, the Airline, Hargrove, they did this." The officer nodded, scribbling, but hours later the report shifted. Suspected insurance fraud, they claimed, pinning it on her. Her stomach sank, corruption swallowing her truth once more. Alone in the chaos, her motel room a smoldering ruin, her life's work ashes, she stood under the night sky, hunted, and framed again. Claire's smirk loomed in her mind, a specter of vengeance. The crowd thinned, firefighters dousing the last flames, and Lena wrapped her arms around herself, her blazer charred, her body trembling. She'd exposed Claire, sparked a federal probe, thought she'd crush them, but they'd countered with fire, turned her victory into a death trap. The police eyed her, their fraud story a noose tightening around her neck. Her firm was gone, her pitch dead, her safety a myth. She'd pushed too far, hit too hard, and they'd burned her world to the ground. Rage surged, a wildfire of its own. She wouldn't run, wouldn't break. She'd fight, even if it killed her. She slipped into the shadows, her phone's battery low, her mind racing. The feds were on Hargrove. Claire was cuffed then freed, but they weren't done. She needed more. Proof, power, a final strike. The motel smoldered behind her, a graveyard of her last stand, and she vowed revenge, her resolve a blade honed by loss. Claire watched from a distance, hidden in a car across the street, her eyes glinting in the dark, her uncle's voice on the phone. "She's still breathing," she hissed. "Fix it." The line clicked, and Claire's smirk widened. Her next play already forming, a lethal shadow Lena couldn't see. The city swallowed her, the night thick with danger. Her breaking point a crucible forging something new. She'd lost everything, her work, her home, her trust, but not her will. Claire had burned her out, framed her again, but Lena's fight wasn't over. She moved through the streets, a ghost with a purpose, unaware of the eyes tracking her, the trap tightening. Her victory had been a spark. This was the inferno, and Claire's final strike loomed, ready to end it all. Lena Carter crouched in the dim glow of a motel bathroom, the cracked mirror reflecting her battered face. Bruised cheeks, bloodshot eyes, a jagged cut across her palm from the fire that had torched her last refuge. The room stank of bleach and smoke, her charred blazer draped over the sink, her coffee-stained skirt a tattered relic of the flight that started it all. Her new phone, its battery flickering at 5%, sat beside her, a lifeline to the world she'd lost. The city outside buzzed with late-night traffic, oblivious to her war, but she knew Claire Donovan and her uncle, Richard Hargrove, were close, watching, waiting, their next strike poised to kill. Her pitch was ash, her firm gone, her life reduced to this hideout, but her rage burned bright, a furnace fueling her final stand. She'd hacked into the airline's servers hours ago, her fingers trembling over a borrowed laptop from a motel clerk who'd taken pity on her. The feds were probing Hargrove, Claire was out on bail, but Lena needed more. Proof to bury them, not just bruise them. Her cloud files had sparked the fire, but this was deeper. She scrolled through encrypted records, her breath hitching as she unearthed a gold mine, crash reports, falsified logs, payouts to grieving families, all signed by Hargrove. One file stopped her cold, a flight from 5 years back, a mechanical failure killing 92 people, including her cousin Marla, a college sophomore heading to a summer internship. The report blamed pilot error, but Lena's eyes locked on the truth. Hargrove had covered up faulty maintenance, bribed inspectors, and pocketed the savings. Marla's death wasn't an accident. It was murder. Her hands shook, tears, blurring the screen as memories flooded back. Marla's laugh, her sketches of bridges she'd never build, the call that shattered Lena's family, Claire's venom, Hargrove's drawl. They'd built their empire on blood, and Lena had paid the price her whole life without knowing. She copied the files, her mind racing. Press conference, live TV, maximum exposure. She texted her journalist friend, her message blunt. Found crash cover-up. Meet me at Channel 7 now. The reply pinged fast. On it. Be there in 20. Lena stood, her ribs aching, her resolve steel. This wasn't just revenge, it was justice. For Marla, for her, for every voice they'd silenced. She slipped. Out, the night air biting her cuts as she hailed a cab, the driver eyeing her warily but speeding toward Midtown. The city glittered, a false promise of safety, and she clutched her phone. The files synced, her heart pounding. Channel 7 studio loomed ahead, news vans already parked. The press conference set for Hargrove to address the allegations. Lena's cab screeched to a halt, and she stormed inside, her journalist friend, Tara, waiting with a producer. You sure? Tara asked, her eyes wide. Lena nodded, her voice raw. They killed my cousin. Let's end this. The producer rushed her on stage, the live feed cutting in, cameras rolling as Hargrove stood at the podium, his suit crisp, his drawl smooth. Ladies and gentlemen, he began. These accusations are baseless. Lena cut him off, striding forward, her torn clothes a stark contrast to his polish. Baseless? She shouted, holding up her phone, the files projected on a screen behind her. You faked crash reports, killed 92 people, including my cousin Marla Carter, and buried it. The room gasped, reporters scribbling, cameras zooming as the documents flashed, dates, signatures, payouts, undeniable proof. Hargrove's face paled, his mouth flapping, but Lena pressed on. You framed me, burned my home, tried to kill me to hide this. Claire helped you every step, every lie. The crowd erupted, shouts drowning Hargrove's stammered denials. Claire burst from the wings, her bun loose, her eyes wild. "She's lying!" she screamed, lunging at Lena, her nails clawing for the phone. Security tackled her midair, pinning her to the floor as she thrashed, her uniform ripping. "Please!" she wailed, turning to Lena, tears streaming. "Mercy! I didn't mean it!" The cameras caught it all, her breakdown live for millions. The scene from The Hook, 3 minutes after her final humiliation. Her power shattered. Lena stared down, her chest heaving. Claire's pleas a hollow echo against Marla's memory. Hargrove bolted, shoving through the crowd, but feds swarmed the exits, cuffing him mid-escape, his suit jacket tearing as he yelled, "You'll pay. For this!" Claire sobbed, her wrists bound, her confession spilling out. "He made me do it. The drugs, the fire, all of it." The studio buzzed, reporters shouting, the screen frozen on the crash files, Lena's truth a tidal wave. She stepped back, her body trembling, her victory bittersweet. The feds hauled Hargrove and Claire away, their empire crumbling, the airline stock plummeting as the world watched. Lena walked off stage, Tara at her side, the roar fading behind her. She stood outside, the city's lights blurring through her tears. Her pitch was gone, her firm lost, her home ash. But she'd won something bigger. Marla's death had a name now, a face, and Lena had torn it down. Her phone buzzed, dead at 1%, but she didn't need it. Her story was out, her voice heard. She'd faced Claire's venom, Hargrove's machine, and turned their lies into a reckoning. The scars remained, bruises, cuts, a life rebuilt from rubble. But she was free, her name a symbol of justice, not shame. She walked into the night, her steps steady, her head high, a warrior forged in fire. But the twist lingered. In a jail cell miles away, Claire sat, her cuffs glinting under fluorescent light, her sobs a mask. A guard slipped her a burner phone, Hargrove's money still working, and she dialed a number, her voice low. "She thinks it's over," she whispered, her smirk creeping back. "Get her. Finish it." The line clicked, a shadow nodded in the dark, and Claire leaned back, her plea a ploy, her mercy a lie. Lena's triumph was real, her justice seismic, but Claire's vengeance simmered, a final strike brewing from the ashes. The city swallowed Lena's footsteps, the night hiding the threat, her victory a fragile dawn before a storm she didn't see coming. The skyscrapers towered, silent witnesses to her war, their glass reflecting a woman who'd lost everything yet gained a legacy. Marla's face lingered in her mind, a quiet peace settling over the pain. She'd exposed the truth, broken the machine, but Claire's shadow stretched long, her uncle's reach deeper than the feds could dig. Lena moved on, unaware, her scars, a map of survival, her resolve a shield for battles yet to come. The story closed, the cameras off, but the game wasn't done. Claire's plot ticked forward, a cliffhanger poised to strike. Lena Carter's harrowing journey aboard a flight-turned-battlefield reveals profound truths about resilience, systemic bias, and the cost of standing up. The first lesson is unyielding courage. Lena faced relentless racial attacks from Claire, Donovan, yet refused to shrink, even when cuffed, framed, and hunted. Her story shows that fighting back, though exhausting, can spark change, as her persistence exposed a corrupt empire. Second, it underscores the power of evidence. Her recordings and unearthed files turned whispers into a roar, toppling Claire and Hargrove's lies. In a world quick to judge, proof can shift the narrative, but it's a fragile weapon, easily destroyed or ignored. Third, the tale exposes the depth of systemic racism. Claire's venom wasn't isolated. It was backed by Hargrove's machine, a reminder that prejudice often hides in power structures, not just individuals. Lena's near destruction highlights how these systems crush the vulnerable, yet her survival proves they can be challenged. Finally, it's a bittersweet lesson in victory. Lena won justice for her cousin Marla and countless others, but at a personal cost: her career, her home, her peace. True triumph often comes with scars, and Claire's lingering threat warns that the fight never fully ends. This story teaches us to stand tall, gather proof, confront systems, and brace for the fallout. Lena's defiance lit a fire, but the embers of resistance must keep burning. So, what's your take? Have you ever faced a Claire in your life? Someone who pushed you down but underestimated your strength? Comment below, hit like if Lena's grit resonates, subscribe for more tales of battling the odds, and share to spread the fight against injustice. Thanks for joining this wild ride. May you find your own strength to rise no matter the storm ahead.